What's up, everyone? Welcome to this week's episode of Quick Fix Fantasy. Couple things before we get started. Dr. Doug Leby is in Sweden right now working out of a hotel room, so please bear with us on the internet connection. It's not his fault, it's the hotel's. We did our best to stitch it together and make it as, comprehensible as possible. And secondly, you'll see during the show that the DraftKings lines aren't out yet. Of course, as soon as we ended the show, DraftKings dropped their lines. So at the end of the show, you will see Dr. Doug Leby get into it, a little solo show talking about what's sticking out to him, in DraftKings and daily fantasy. So without further ado, enjoy this week's episode of Quick Fix Fantasy. All right, everyone, welcome back to Quick Fix Fantasy. I know it's been a couple weeks. You definitely miss us. I am your host, one of your hosts, Chris P., and I am joined by the brains behind the operation, Dr. Doug Leby from across the pond right now. I think you consider that across the pond?
Yes. Yeah. So I joked to someone earlier that I'm over here in Sweden right now doing a little scouting of amateur Call of Duty talent. It's tough to find these Swedish players, but you just got to know where to look. So yeah, I'm over here. My wife's presenting at a conference and they offered to pay for her half of the trip. And I said, hey, I could come along for that. So yeah, we're here enjoying. Sweden's beautiful this time of year. I'd never been. But yeah, it'll be sad to miss champs in the most live sense, I suppose. I was planning to go before this trip, but also just being able to tweet about it live. We're 7 or 9 hours ahead of Vegas, so it'll be a little tough, a little bittersweet, but I mean, I'm not arguing. It's 75 and sunny out, and it's sunny until 10 p.m. So it's great here.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds incredible. We were talking about this earlier. It is sad. I'm not going to be at Champs either, which, stinks. It's the only event that I missed all year. And of course, it falls on Champs. But shout out to my friend getting married. So, I can't really spite him too much. It only happens once, hopefully. So I can't really miss that. But
I've shared it before, but I went to every single LAG game in-person event from the beginning of the franchise. And the first event I didn't go to was Major 2 of last year, and they won. So maybe this is a good sign for you. I actually like that a lot. That's narrative street for sure.
Damn, I might be bad. See, that's what I worry about. If they win, I get fired. I'm bad luck. I don't have a job anymore.
I texted Embry, our coach, at the time when we won and said, no way, I'm bad luck. And he was like, nah, you can't come to another event after this. It turned out I wasn't the bad luck, but I mean, that was my first, I'm sitting there on the TV watching us win, and I texted him immediately. He said, I'm never coming to anything again. It's so sad.
It's brutal, but it is shaping up to be an awesome event. I heard the attendance here is going to be crazy. Really good desk talent's going to be there, as well as some really great teams. Some returning guests. I know Lottie, who used to commentate. She's coming back for Champs. They're going to have Claser out on the desk. They have Shift from the Challenger scene, who's going to be stepping in, who's an awesome guy, does a great job for the Challenger scene. But it's just shaping up to be awesome. Everything I've seen from Champs right now in Vegas as a whole just looks incredible, and I don't have FOMO at all. Let's just go with that one for now. I'm not missing out at all right now. We're just going to go with that one. But with that being said, Doug, the reason people are here is not to hear us complain about how we're not there and how the sun's out until 10. They don't care about that. I care about that. They don't care about that. But what they do care about is the numbers and what teams are playing, and what Champs looks like from the eyes of someone like yourself who does this analytic stuff. Who does it? So from a bird's eye view, what is Champs looking like to you?
I think Champs this year is interesting, and I mean the odds on just the odds on each team to win Champs sort of outlines the interesting thing about Champs this year, which is that it's basically there are 5 teams with really strong chances to win Champs, and none of them are particularly favored over any of the others. And then there are 3 teams that the bookmakers say have pretty much no chance to win Champs in Seattle, Minnesota, and Boston. And it's interesting because you have this double elimination 8-team bracket. You would think that sort of intuitively there maybe should be 2 teams with low chances, 2 teams with a little higher, and then maybe 4 teams with a great chance, or just as stepwise. And so I think that there's this weird dynamic right now where everyone knows that 3 of the teams are much weaker than the other 5 teams, and it's just really, I think that'll make the bracket very interesting, honestly. If there were just 2 teams that were bad, you say, okay, those 2 teams will lose the first round, and then they'll lose in the first round of losers, and then that's it. But we know one of those 3 teams is not going to go home finishing 7-8. And so I think it gives this weird dynamic, which is maybe one of those three teams you could ride. And like, I know we maybe could talk about breaking point fantasy, but just in regular fantasy too, like one of those teams is going to have to do well on day 2, day 3. So like this isn't just a stack the favorites and sit back. There are 5 favorites basically. So even if you stacked all the favorites, you'd be stacking a favorite against another favorite. So like the big matchup in round 1 is 100T against Toronto in terms of like of those the 5 golden children that the bookmakers seem to like. Vegas against Toronto, Toronto against LAT, not LV, in Vegas. But yeah, so I just think it's going to be a very interesting bracket.
And anything could happen on land. If there's one thing that we've learned, being in the space and following the space, land's a whole different ball game, right? Some people, the lights are too bright. Other people, they thrive in the light. And, we're not going back to, the what can be, what should be, how they're playing, how they're feeling. It's ultimately who shows up that day. It can happen. It could be anyone's game. At the end of the day, these are all professional players. They all got paid great salaries. They all practice a shit ton of time. It could really go in any way possible. And one big thing that stands out to me, and this is in the least biased way possible, is Optic against Boston at this major, where Boston just made that roster change, bringing up Snoopy, 18-year-old from Monterrey, Mexico, who's made such a name for himself already in a short period of time. Shout out to Doug Sensamountain for finding this kid. That guy is the best recruiter of all time. But from someone who watches behind the scenes and whatnot, I think the kid's ready. And not a lot of people think he is. And the comparisons that are being made to him and the speed that he plays at, people are comparing him to Shotzi. And I like just hearing that is amazing. But like, this can be a changing moment in this kid's life, and 110% doesn't exist. But if your job is right there, you're going to do everything in your power to, go towards that and play the best you possibly can.
I mean, talk about a situation where the pressure is off of you pretty significantly. Boston is a team that makes a change leading into champs because they feel like they can do better, and they lean on you. So they're already in a bad spot. And then, they're playing Optic Texas in the first game, which is not anybody's ideal first showing. But I mean, I'd say in terms of like normally I'm very much a homer for like LAN is something that newer players need to get used to. It's very hard to just show up on LAN your first time. But I think the problem is that usually when you show up on LAN, there's a lot of pressure, especially for like the typical case. A rookie comes in and joins the league and then it looks pretty good, but then they go to their first LAN and it's tough or something like that. But this case with Snoopy is not really that, because they're already midway through the season. He doesn't really have anything to prove. He gets to play Optic Texas in his first game. So like I like his situation better than I like most rookies going directly to LAN, I guess. Typically, I'm very, very cautious of rookies on LAN at first, but I mean, you can't put a better situation than come join a team that felt like they needed help even after the season was over, and you have to play like probably the event's favorite. I'm sure the crowd will be with Texas. So like no pressure. You just do whatever you want. And if you stumble a little bit, nobody's gonna think that you're not a good player. Like if he goes out and Boston, God forbid, doesn't do well and he has a bad series, he's still going to be either on a team next year or a top prospect. Like this isn't a stock hurting situation for him. So I like the no pressure aspect.
That was a big thing. Like when it was announced, everyone was like, oh, like his career could be ruined. Like if he doesn't perform this, come on. I mean, what he's getting thrown into, and I believe in him. I really do. I think he's a phenomenal player, and I think he's going to turn a lot of heads, and I think he's going to shock a lot of people on what he can bring to that stage. This is what he's worked his whole life for. And, in the last 3-4 weeks, that kid's life has changed. He's not going to let this opportunity to slip by. And if he goes there and he proves himself, or just, say he does the bare minimum up there, people know what he just got into, and you have to respect like the courageousness, even if it wasn't his call. There was no hesitation. It's like, let's do it. I think we could win. And boom.
Yeah, context always matters in these situations. And it's I think the people who are in the know will know. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I've seen that comment a million times on Twitter, and it's just tough. But I wouldn't be making any bets with anyone that he will this will be the last time we ever hear that name in the CDL. Like that is just a ridiculous statement to make, I think, at this juncture.
Yeah.
He would have to, come out and we find out that he was actually just cheating all year. I mean, that would be the only way or something. He comes out and he doesn't know which way to hold the controller or something. It's just, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's a win-win even if it's a loss. But, he's the new face of the league, but there are some old faces in the league who are still an extremely dominant team in Atlanta FaZe. It seems like they could do no wrong. How do you feel about them in particular going into champs?
Yeah, I think it's been very frustrating to me as like someone who's been very high or like I think I see the season like it's everything leads up to champs for sure. And if you look at the placings across the season, FaZe has been the strongest across the board. I mean, there's certainly something to be said for getting hot at the end of the year, but I don't think that should take away from things that people did at the beginning of the year or the consistency that teams have had throughout the year. We talked about last time how FaZe, I mean, it's been around on Twitter too, that FaZe have finished first in the league every year. And they finished no worse than top 3 all year. I mean, it is just really hard for me as just a bettor who's like, I'm going with the long run averages. I'm trying to use as much information to help form my decisions. Well, if I use all the information I can possibly use, it's going to be pointing that FaZe is the best team. I can maybe use some recency bias to like help make cases for New York, especially because they got hot at the end of the year, and maybe against LAT because they didn't do well in the last event, in the last major. But like if I'm looking at the whole season, I'm trying to use as much data as possible. I love Atlanta. I think they're a really strong team. I think they've been strong all year. I think they've been strong the last 4 years. Like it's just really hard to pick against them, in my opinion.
Especially in this bracket too, when you get to land, you have to, I guess, warm up, right? Where like, you could do your scrims leading into, but like you got to get on the stage, you got to play one, and they're starting things off against a struggling Seattle right now, which like it's pretty dangerous. But okay, cool, like go get your reps in up there. And I'm not saying Seattle's a bad team by any means. I think they're a phenomenal team. They're just, they just haven't found their way, or they haven't really clicked like we know they can. But for a team like FaZe, who's been so consistent, opening up against them and really knocking the rust off for the rest of the tournament, it's kind of a cheat code for them, I feel like, in this tournament.
Yeah, I think just to add on that a little, because I think you're 100% right. I think playing Seattle is really nice. But if we think like a little deeper into the bracket as well, so like let's say they can take care of business against Seattle, they'll play the winner of Toronto versus 100 Thieves. And if they were to lose that game, I still like them in that game. But if they were to lose that game, they're going to be walking into a potential winner of Boston, Minnesota, assuming Boston and Minnesota, the other 2 weaker teams, lose their games. One of those teams will have to win in that matchup again between the 2 teams. And the winner of that game will have to play the loser of the Atlanta, the potential Atlanta Toronto or Atlanta LA Thieves series. So like I think Atlanta's in a really nice spot because they could potentially play all 3 of the bottom 3 teams, like any of the 3. They can't play all 3. Minnesota or Boston will have to be eliminated if they lose. But I really like that spot. I think their bracket is probably perfect for like one of the 5 favorites. We sort of talked about Boston having a really nice bracket as one of the underdog teams. I think they could potentially go a long way, or they could go longer than people think. But Atlanta is in an amazing spot where even if they are to lose to Toronto or 100T, they're not going to be out of it. They're going to be facing another bottom 3 team again in their next game, most likely. And so like, before the whole thing starts, I really like Atlanta's path the most.
I like that. I think one team with consistency that is also consistent that you brought up, and it also comes full circle with a rookie at their first LAN, because they did win their first LAN with this rookie in Hixie, is Toronto Ultra. Really, really good team. Arguably rookie of the year with Scrap on the team. How are you feeling about them in this tournament? I believe they're the best hardpoint team in the league. Is that correct?
Yeah, they definitely, at least to me, I'd say that they're the best hardpoint team. I think they have the best hardpoint record. I've been very vocal on Twitter and otherwise that I think like hardpoint wins championships. The reason people think that S&D wins championships is because you have to lose hard points to play Game 5 S&D. And if you play Game 5, then it's all that sticks in your head. But to me, hardpoint has always been the thing that not only can teams get the strongest at, but it also gets played more often than S&D does in an average series. I think being a hardpoint team is a really good advantage in this day and age. I think anybody can get lucky in a couple searches, especially when we're talking about here, where you only have to win 4 times to win the whole thing. So like a couple searches going your way, get a Game 5 round 11 win going your way. I'm really leaning into my hardpoint. And so I think Toronto is the strongest hardpoint team. And also, just to go back to what I said about FaZe, if Toronto were to lose, if they were to beat 100T and then lose to FaZe, they get to play that same matchup of potentially Boston, Minnesota. So I'd like Toronto, Atlanta. I think that side of the bracket is a little like is nice for Atlanta and Toronto. I think that they're both sitting in like pretty comfy spots. I think Atlanta and Toronto are both stronger than Seattle and 100T by at least a little bit, in Atlanta's case a lot. And so I really like this like when they match up, the loser of that game is not at a severe disadvantage. I'd expect, I'll make a bold call. I think that matchup, if it happens, if it's Atlanta Toronto, will probably be the same matchup in the finals. So there you go. Hot take number 1 coming in hot 10 minutes in.
I like that. All I do know, though, is if Toronto has to go against Boston, I've been told this from an inside source, that Ben Beans really wants his redemption against Toronto, and that's the team he wants to play on land. That's what I've been told from an inside source. So it's what I've been told.
So all right, it's not as good for Toronto. They gotta win that game against FaZe. So if Toronto wins, I'll say if Toronto wins, they'll play FaZe in the finals. But if FaZe wins, I don't know. I'm not standing in front of Beans on his path through Toronto. So that's dangerous.
Nothing's gonna stop McMillan. That's what everyone keeps saying. So we're gonna have to see how that one goes. But yeah, really good teams. Obviously, when it comes to champs, only the best teams get there. As a whole, the whole league was so competitive this year, which I loved. I feel like year after year, things are just becoming a lot more competitive, and I feel like it's only going to go up from here, especially with, the way that rosters are shaking out and how people finish and whatnot. Roster mania is going to be nuts. So who knows what next year is going to look like? I can't wait personally. But with that being said, why don't we talk about some money? Talk about what the slate's looking like. What PrizePicks, DraftKings, what have you. What's going on those that are sticking out to you right now, Dr. Doug?
All right, so we are recording this my nighttime, your day before, and DraftKings still hasn't posted their slate, which is pretty classic DraftKings for COD. So we can't talk about the specific slate, but a birdie told me that we might be delivering some DraftKings related content throughout the weekend. So we might not be just limiting ourselves to DraftKings first slates of the weekend. I heard from a reputable source that there might be some DraftKings information as the weekend goes on.
Wow. The sources are going crazy today.
We've got lots of insider sources here on the Quick Fix Fantasy Podcast. The intel is just flowing through our DMs. But we can talk a little bit about PrizePicks. I have been vocal about control in PrizePicks in general. Control seems to be fairly mispriced right now on PrizePicks. Quick shout out here. I mean, like, I think that PrizePicks is something that if you're just playing it off gut feel, it is going to be very hard for you because there's a lot that goes on in a game that's hard to get an intuition for. And I've talked about control, the distribution of the rounds in control being one of those things. It's very hard to realize that if the game goes 3-2, even in the other team's favor, there are going to be a lot more kills in that game. I actually was just doing some research into if you have like an average player, what situations, if you had to rank the 6 possible scores, 3-0 to 0-3, the 6 possible scores, 3-0, 3-1 back, which scores would you have that player in if you wanted to hit the over in orders? Like the best score, if you want to hit the over, is 3-2 win. A 3-2 win, players see the most points on average, but the next highest is 2-3 loss, not 3-1 win. And so like there's some non-intuitive distributions to how control scores work, and I think PrizePicks kind of misses out on this, but it's very hard if you're just playing on intuition. So to me, I think that like having like either a model or at least trying to estimate the probabilities of these things happening is really important. So the shout out I want to give is to Breaking Point. Like they just released a new stats lab that uses like a new dashboard where you can see not only the averages of the kills, but also the distributions of the kills that that each player has gotten. It allows you to input your own overs and unders, so you can check even if the over under changes during the time, you can check it. And I just think that's a great thing. Like I have my own tools, but not everybody does. And like I think that tool, I was not very impressed with the original tool. I'll be honest, I didn't think that it really helped you actually win because it just told you the average kills. But this new thing is a great step. I would encourage everybody to check it out. Like yeah, it talks about medians as well as averages, and so looking at those median scores for control, so like let me give one example of a play that I think is interesting, and that I found some of this data. So since I'm outside the United States, I can't go on PrizePicks. I also can't access my own data because it's on my home computer. And so like this is sort of, I mean, like I was sort of like a casual viewer process that today as I'm doing, because I can't look at the PrizePicks, I can't look at DraftKings, I can't do anything. And so I used Breaking Point and I looked at Sky's over under 20.5 in control map 3. I think that's an interesting spot. Sky's is the guy I've been targeting control as it is. So he's over under 20.5. So how many times has he gone under 20.5 this season in control? 66% of the time. So in like 45 games or something, 2/3 of the time he's gone under 20.5, which is pretty interesting because we see New York in a spot where they're probably fairly decent favorites in their game against Minnesota in control. And so you say, okay, well, maybe I discount that a little because New York is probably bigger favorites against Minnesota than normal. But what I just said is interesting about the control scores is 3-1 is the third best score if you want overs. And so like that to me says, okay, well, 3-0s and 3-1s are probably good for the under here. 3-0s and 3-1s for New York are probably best case scenarios for the under. And then you look at Skies. I mean, I don't have the numbers pulled up with me. I was looking at it before the show that like if you look at the maps that New York has won 3-0 and 3-1, you're like, okay, somebody has to go off when they 3-0 and 3-1. It's never Skies. I mean, when New York is 3-0ing, Skies is getting 8 kills, 11 kills against Lag. I remember that. So like I just think Sky's under is very interesting here because of that. Like you think about the score dynamics, you look at his normal score, he's gone under 2/3 of the time. But then I think just like one other interesting thing, if you look at New York's wins this season, which the Breaking Point tool allows you to do, he's gone under in their wins on under 20.5 72% of the time. So even more of the time when they win does he go under. So you might think like, oh, when they lose he probably gets less kills. Well, actually when they win he gets less kills too, at least a higher percentage of the time this year. 21 out of 29 control wins he's gone under 20.5.
All right, that's extremely interesting. I think a big proponent of that might be how Hydra's been playing as well. He's having a great season. I think when Hydra's on, it's very, very difficult to beat this team. And obviously in control, there's only so many kills you can get. And if you're letting Hydra just run around, be a pest, be a slayer, there's not much left, like there's not much meat on the bone to even go after.
Yeah, exactly. I think this sort of strategy that I've been looking at here with these like getting the unders on some mispriced controls falls apart significantly with players like Hydra or even just like subs, like main fast subs in general, because the range of outcomes that a sub who's moving at 1,000 miles an hour can have when they have a good game. Yeah, if you get a 3-0 and you've got a guy moving 1,000 miles an hour, it can be really tough not to go over because they're just going to run into so many guys, and it means they're winning all the gunfights. Like, so yeah, I would never do this with Hydra. But like on the other hand, like a player like Skies, his best outcome, like if you think about Sky's best games, they're 20-4 games or something like that. You never see a Sky's stat line 44-30 or something like that in like or even in a quick 3-0. He's never going 20-19. He's always going to be the slowest player. And so I do think that that's probably like another aspect, another angle on this is like, who are the guys that are always going slow in the game? Like who are the guys like the slasher types that like slasher fits this bill well for Atlanta, as well as like I don't have his over under as one to watch, but it's the same sort of thing. Like when they're winning, it's because Abeezy's putting up 45, not because Austin's suddenly dropping 40 and 20. He's going to go slow. He might get a 5.0 KD, but he's not getting 40. So like, yeah, I think that's probably an interesting point that you made there. It's like Hydra, for all the reasons I said Sky's a great under, I'm not thinking that about Hydra, even though it's like, oh, the game could be fast. It's like, yeah, because Hydra's going to put it away. Hydra's going to be the one doing it.
Yeah. It's good points. I mean, that's the way that AIs are playing in this game as well. It's slow, methodical. Like you have your, I guess, faster AIs, your, Ben Beanses of the world, your Awakenings who are more on the fast side when it comes to AIs. But then you have your, your Caesar Skies and your slashers who have been around for a bit and they know how to hold those angles and hold those lanes. And that's just their game, but that sets their team up for success. Also plays into some unders. I mean, it's a great call. And you were also mentioning something that stuck out to you on Toronto's side. Is that true? Maybe a little Hicksy action? You're frozen. Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, there you are.
Back?
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah,
Hey.
a second. Yeah, hotel Wi-Fi. Yeah, I think Hicksy is another example of a player that, like, if you look at the games where Toronto does well, Hicksy's not getting that many engagements. Like, he is a sub, to be fair, and I think Insight honestly fits the bill pretty well. Hicksy and Insight. Toronto is just a very binary team in terms of when they get a lot of kills, it's the Scrappy and Kleenex combo that seems to be doing it. I know a lot was made about the fact that when Hicksy came back, that it really opened Kleenex up to do more on the map. And I think that, like, that's what you see when with Toronto when they win. Toronto is interesting because they fit really strongly into this 3-0s and 3-1s are good for the unders category, because Toronto does get a lot of 3-0s and 3-1s. I mean, they are insane at control. And so, like, I've liked the Hicksy over, or the unders on Hicksy a lot. So he's over under 21 and a half. So in his 26 maps that he's played, 19 of them have been under 21 and a half, which is interesting because I just mentioned that Toronto's a really strong control team, and, like, they're probably a little less than average chance to win in this game relative to their normal game, because, like, they draw a pretty tough opponent in the first round. And so, like, although I think this game might go a little longer, I think there's a chance that they could lose or at least be challenged here. And so I think the Hicksy under is still interesting. So I did another thing you can do on the breaking point tool is you can exclude certain score lines. So you can exclude 3-0s and 0-3s. So if we're just looking at games that are closer, he's been under 11 out of those 18 games. I don't know what that is exactly, but more than half of the time by a good margin, he's been under, even in the games when they've been close, which I think is interesting here, because I do think this sort of doesn't quite fit Toronto's average control, like, win probability. I'd say it's probably a little worse than average because they've just been so dominant all year, but they draw a tough team. So I do like the Hicksy under here as well. I've been a Hicksy under connoisseur, and I think maybe this game isn't as good. I think the Skies under is really, really, like, enticing, but I do think that, like, even on this slate, like, I think this is just a great example of how to think about the score effects combined with, like, who the player is and, like, their stat history. Because you don't always get to play the average of all of your past games. So this is, like, a good example of that.
You know, Doug, you're a smart guy. I like everything you're saying. I might have to use some of that information this weekend during Call of Duty Champs, because, you know, if I'm gonna get my information from anywhere, I might as well get it from, you know, the best podcast there is that actually talks about this. And I'm not going to be biased. I know I'm on the show, but I'm pretty much just a pretty face here, you know? That's all I am. So, and obviously, you know, DraftKings does not have their lines out right now. And you've been mentioned the great people over at Breaking Point, a good amount, phenomenal people over there. We've worked with them in the past. Awesome. Head to toe, really great group. Do you want to talk a little bit about what's going over there and, like, any of their competitions? Maybe it gives a little insight into DraftKings.
Yeah. So, I mean, anybody who's followed me knows that I don't know why they care. They cared enough to ask me at the beginning of the year what my fantasy picks were for Breaking Point Fantasy. But I love the game. I know that the community really loves the Breaking Point Fantasy game. And I mean, the story goes that in Major 1, they asked me for my lineup, and I gave them my lineup, but I didn't do any research. I just, like, I had never played before because I'd always been on a team, and I just never really cared about it. And I played, and I came in, like, either last or I came in second to last, but it was like me and the other person were like 80 points behind the next, and it was just super embarrassing. And so, like, I tweeted that, like, I was gonna go harder and, like, learn and, like, actually make a model and, like, predict. And then I came in third in Major 2, and I think I came in third this last major as well. So I feel like I've been, like, honing my skills to become a Breaking Point Fantasy master.
I mean, it's out of spite. You just did it out of spite. I remember watching a video on, like, I think it was like Britain's Got Talent or some shit. The guy's like, oh yeah, when I was a kid, I got fooled by a magic trick, and he never showed me how to do it. So in that moment, I decided I was going to dedicate the rest of my life to magic and be a magician. So that's what you did.
It's pretty much that. Except I would say it's also embarrassment as well. I was just like, you never realize how embarrassing it is until, like, Breaking Point obviously has a lot more followers than me, to, like, see a tweet and it's like, yeah, Doug Leby came in last place, but then sometimes they'll, like, gas up my stuff and say, oh yeah, check this guy's stuff out, he's really smart, and it's like, and then they might accidentally click on it and see that I came in last. Like, it was too embarrassing. I had to do something about it. But no. So one important thing is that, like, the contest that I was in with the thing they tweet about, where it's just like 20 or 25 people and like people from around the scene, that's a little bit different because there's who plays DraftKings knows the dynamics in a contest with 20 people versus 2,000 people is much different. On Breaking Point, the contest, they're giving $2,000 to first place, and then nothing to anyone else. So it's basically like DraftKings contest on steroids. Like they have a huge payout structure, except you literally only get money if you win the whole thing. And so like I think my advice to people playing in that contest is, one, don't play like me, because I get a lot more glory for coming in third place than you. If you come in third place, you get nothing. And so like basically be opposite me. Be the guy who's willing to come in last place overall. So I'll give a little hint that last year in my bracket, I just 4-stacked Boston because like I thought at the time that like, if they don't win the whole thing, then whatever. But if they win the whole thing, like, and I had them as like a little bit of a dark horse. And so I was like, okay, like I like that. I think here, Boston, Minnesota, and Seattle, they're pretty dark horses. So it's going to be tough. Like if they do win and you pick them, you will win the whole thing for sure. I think getting to the finals is really important, but winning is not as important because of the way that Breaking Point scores the games. You basically get more points the more games you play. And so just getting into the finals guarantees you the most games possible. And so I think the winning entry will either be a 3-1 stack of a team that wins the whole thing, and then Hicksy probably because he's really underpriced, or it will be like a 2-2 or a 2-1-1 with 2 players from one of these more expensive winning teams, and then another player who makes the finals, and then someone else. I think those are probably the two most likely winners. To go a little bit further on that, like I think like it's like, okay, there are 5 teams, and like I probably you want to stack, like stack or starve here definitely applies. We want to stack those teams, but I think Texas is just a little too cheap. Looking at the pricing on them, you can fit a lot of the Texas players on your team. So Hook at $6 and Ghosty at $7. Like they give you a couple low price options. Just to give a little context, I don't think there are no $5 or $4 players that aren't on one of those bottom 3 teams. And then Hook and Priesta are the only those 3 teams that are $6. So no 5s, no 4s. Other than Hicksy. I mentioned it earlier, but Hicksy is $4, which makes no sense. But again, you don't make anything. And so if you're playing Hicksy, so everyone else. So it makes me a little weary if I were playing in the major contest to play Hicksy, just because if Toronto wins the whole thing, or like if Toronto even does pretty well and Hicksy's in the other people's lineups, you're going to be in a tough spot. I think if you're not using Hicksy, the types of lineups that you can build with like a 6 and a 5 plus like a couple higher price guys might make your lineup unique enough to win. So like my 2 notes are like, if you're playing Hicksy, your lineups are probably going to look like everybody else's lineups for the most part. And if you are playing Texas, you're going to be playing the same lineup as a lot of other people, I would suspect. So to me, I think the other 4 teams are probably like the bigger opportunities here. Not necessarily the most likely to win, but the best chance that you win the $2,000. Because if you take Texas plus Hicksy as your lineup, you might win, but you're going to be splitting that $2,000 with 500 other people who also picked that. And so like, yeah, I guess it depends. Do you want to win $10 some of the time or $2,000 very infrequently? So yeah, I would say like those are my general thoughts. Do you think that is fair?
I would. That's how I would play it. I mean, if I'm going to do it, I might as well do it and try to actually win something, of them, the $10 split. I think with those things, it's kind of, if you even want to call it high risk, high reward, where it's just like you got to try to do something different. That's how I used to look at DraftKings when I was younger, and I used to do like traditional sports. I'm like, no one's gonna pick this guy. I'm throwing him in because if he goes nuts, who the hell's gonna pick Joe Schmo on the Ravens? Yeah. Like no one even knows this guy is a 3rd string running back. Like I gotta take a risk on it. But I'm the same way.
Yeah, you got to differentiate yourself from the field in some way. I think so. Like I mentioned a couple like maybe not smart things to do, which would be like to go heavy on Texas or heavy on Hicksy. But I think here's like a couple of things that I've been thinking about that might be worthwhile. I do think we talked about it earlier about Boston's path being pretty lucrative here. They get to play, even if they lose their first game against Texas, they're going to be playing potentially Minnesota, who despite them losing to Minnesota recently, I still think Boston is a stronger team than Minnesota is. And so like for Boston, there's pretty much outside of Seattle no better team to play against. And so like I like Boston to maybe win 1 or 2 games. And like although the breaking point scoring rewards finishing like in first or second really highly, like it is in its essence like a rate-based scoring system. So like if you get kills per minute the most, like that's the best thing that can happen. So like I think a player like Awakening is a great example of like even if Boston loses, Wake always has good stats. Like that's not necessarily to say he plays for stats, but like he has a position in which his stats can be good even when the team loses. So like I really like Wake, especially at $5, is someone who you could get, and then all you need is like maybe 1 win out of Boston, and Wake might be worthwhile. And like you said, you get this differentiation. So we're not just playing we're not just throwing a dart at a board. We like if we're gonna pick a low price player who not a lot of people are gonna have, let's be smart about it. And so I think Wake is a strong pick. I think Kremp is another one where like lower sample size. So like and he's on Boston as well. But like another player that like has some huge upside. We've obviously seen some huge upside out of him in the past. So like I think he's another interesting $5 player that like I think both of them are more interesting to me than Sib at 5. I think Sib, Mac, and accuracy I'm going to be staying away from no matter what, even if I could build 100 of these. So like I do think Wake and Kremp are interesting to me at 5. I think Hook at 6 is really interesting. One thing I mentioned is that like I really like these like paths with Atlanta or Toronto doing really well, and because Atlanta and Toronto are on the same side of the bracket, it makes me more interested in players on Texas in these picks, because I think that you could very much more likely see like a Texas Atlanta final or a Texas Toronto final. Like I mentioned that the loser of the Texas Atlanta or the Toronto Atlanta game is not out by any stretch of the imagination, but they will only have one more loss to give, where a team like Texas is on the opposite side of the bracket. They get to avoid Atlanta and Toronto as long as possible. So like I do like some storylines where it's like Texas versus Atlanta in the finals is very possible. So like getting Hook in at $6 I think is like doable. I think so like something with like maybe a BZ slasher plus Hook and Wake, I think you could fit. Yeah, you could fit a BZ slasher plus Hook and Wake, or Cell slasher plus Hook and Priesta, or Hook and Snoopy, maybe something like that. I think has some upside that like you're not good. I don't think I would bet very few, if anyone, plays the lineup of Cell slasher, Hook, and Snoopy. And like I think that's like a totally reasonable outcome where we have like a Cell slasher, Atlanta's in the finals, plus Hook is in the finals on the other side of the bracket, and Snoopy wins 1 or 2 games and like actually performs really well, and looks like Shotzi, and like that might very well be, I can easily see that being the best lineup. I think if Boston goes 2-0 or it goes 0-2 and is out, you say, well, better luck next year. But I mean, that's the type of game we're playing here. It's like
you have to try.
You have to try. If you play a lineup with 4 teams in it, you're not trying. Like, you don't want to win. If that comes in first place, okay, props to you. But the chances of that happening to me are very, very low, especially here where like in the normal season, like you get the major plus the qualifiers. And in the qualifiers, like the teams winning don't need to be the expense of the other teams. Even if your players play against each other, 4 of the other games, they don't. And so you can have players win from both sides. But like here, only one team's going home, and they're winning or only one team's winning, and everyone else is going home at their expense. And so like I find it very, very hard to believe that even if you nailed first, second, third, and fourth place teams and pick a player from all of them, that would be the best lineup. Like, it will almost certainly be a stack. I guess I should mention that Breaking Point increased their pricing a little so that it's $27 for the cap this time. And like pricing itself hasn't changed a ton, which also just means that like stacking is a lot easier, I think. Players are a little more expensive in the mid-range, but like in general, I think it'll open up. Yeah, you can get a 2-player stack on every good team in the league right now. So like, yeah, I think if you're playing 4 teams, I think the listeners here should be licking their lips saying thank you for that free person I can jump ahead of. Like, there's literally that might be the first place lineup after day 1 or 2, but after that lineup is not going anywhere. Like, those players have to lose. Someone has to lose. If you're playing, I think three teams is tough for me, but I think it's doable to win with. But I think two teams is going to win it. Like, a 2-team slip will win.
It's like traditional sports, right? Say Floyd Mayweather is fighting, me. He's going to be minus 100,000. I'm going to be plus 100,000. All it takes is one good punch, and maybe I win. Would you rather sprinkle a little on there and win the full pot, or just get a little piece of the pie?
if Floyd Mayweather was only plus 100 or minus 100,000 against you, I'd be betting my life savings on Floyd Mayweather.
All right, enjoy winning your $15 off your $1 million you're putting in.
Oh my God. I'm going to eat the most delicious free Jersey Mike sub that night with the winnings.
Now, I would talk to him beforehand, be like, hey, listen, my podcast co-host, he has a lot of money on you. Just throw the game. I'll give you half of the money. Boom. And then you're out money. I get the money. I'll give you a little sprinkle back and be like, never doubt me again.
That somehow seems like something that he would do, or that he would be on board with. But yeah. No, that is, yeah. I think you get the concept. I think your example is poor, but I think you get the concept.
You see what I was trying to do, though, just like, go, if you're going to go for it. Anything could happen. Just, throw a little sprinkle.
What is it? There's an Office quote about it. I mean, there's an Office quote for everything, but it's like, if anyone ever gives you 1,000,000 to 1 odds, you take it. That's a Kevin quote, I'm pretty sure. Like,
I like that. Honestly, I believe in that. I'm the type of person on Sundays. Like I said earlier, I bet on the 4th string tight end that gets 1 snap a game in the red zone at plus 1,000 to score a touchdown. I'd rather that than the running back who scores 2 a game at minus 300.
You can't win plus 100,000 slips unless you're betting them. And
as my uncle once said when he was playing Keno, you can't win if you don't play. So that's a quote I live by now. And he lost that Keno game, but he played.
All right,
we'll
never fault him for playing.
No, you gotta play. All right, so yeah, that was a little different. Touch on breaking point a little bit. If you guys do like this, we will do this. This is more to give you a little insight. So when it comes to you actually putting in your DraftKings lineups, maybe you can use some of this information to your advantage and see how it's priced and how it differs, everything like that. But as Doug said earlier, a source did say, and a source can confirm, that there will be DraftKings content coming out throughout the majors. So if you like money and you like making educated lineups and guesses and picks, all that good stuff, you want to be tuned in. You want to be logged in on our, our Twitter, our Instagram, Doug's social, mine maybe I'll even sprinkle. I usually just boost Doug's stuff because he's a smart one, and I'm just the one with the funny accent. But Doug, do you have anything else before we, say goodbye on this one?
Nope. I wanted to apologize on the air that I misquoted your social handle last time. So maybe you should give your social for the people, because I sent them, if they were really like, man, I missed the other guy on the podcast. Who's this guy? And then I misquoted yours. I just would feel too bad if you didn't get to shout yourself out at least once for that.
I will. I think you said like WWE Crispy. So someone in the WWE just got a couple followers. So shout out to that guy. But my Twitter is WGG Crispy. CHRASP WGG.
I think I got the WGG right, but I put it at the end, or maybe I said WWG or something. I thought it was GGWP, like GG well played. So I think I said Chris GGWP or something like that. But
I kind of like that app. But yeah, WGG Crispy. If you are looking for me, I post some bangers on there. So just go check out the kid. But that's gonna do it for this episode of Quick Fix Fantasy. There's going to be a lot more throughout the weekend, so stay locked in. Happy betting. Do it responsibly. This is Doug Leby, the brains behind the operation. Give you a ton of information today. I can tell the kid is thirsty as hell right now. He's been talking for 45 minutes straight. So go show him some love on socials, and we will see you on the next one.
What's going on, guys? Dr. Doug here from Uppsala, Sweden, ready to go through day 1 of COD CHAMPS DraftKings. So we finally have the slate for day 1, so I just wanted to make a quick video going through some of the pricing, what I'm thinking about, and what you guys maybe can take with you for your cash or GPP games on DraftKings. So we have 3 big favorites on the board today, and then the closer game is Toronto versus LAT. Toronto is minus 160 favorites, where all 3 of the other favorites, New York, Atlanta, and Texas, are minus 400 or better. I know that we get compensated very well for 3-0s, so in this slate in general, I think I like the favorites. There are so many of them. There's a lot you can do with the favorites here. I think the name that sticks out to me the most is Hydra at 10K. He's the cheapest of the best players on each of the 3 favorites. So I think Hydra at 10K is a really strong captain for cash games, but also a lot of upside for a GPP lineup as well. A couple other strong high-priced players that I like, Abizi at 8.8K. I think you get a lot of the same upside that you get from Sell, who's 10.8K, but obviously you get a lot less in terms of pricing. I think that Abizi had one really bad game recently, but other than that, he's still a really strong play. Another sneaky play, I think, is Pred at 9.4K. Typically, you'd see Pred as one of the most expensive players on the slate, but today, because it's a pretty bad matchup against Atlanta, he's a bit cheaper, but I think that in general, he's still a pretty good play. Just looking back, in the last 3 meetings that Seattle has had against Atlanta, Pred scored more than 120 in 2 out of those 3 games. One of them he didn't do as well, but I mean, at 9.4K, you're definitely getting a pretty good price for the potential variance in his outcome. So I like Pred at 9.4K a lot among those high-priced players. I think Dashy is playable. I don't really think Envoy is playable at 10.4K. I think Scrappy is playable at 10.6. Definitely more of a GPP play to me because Scrappy does have a lot of upside, but I think that's a tougher matchup. For lower priced players, I think that Ghosty is a pretty good lock in cash at 6.4K. I think that Ghosty gets a lot of hill time. If Texas does well, that's a lot of hill time for Ghosty, and the potential 3-0 also makes him a good play, even if he doesn't do anything. Getting a 3-0 for a player like that is going to make him meet his value. We talk about value. I'm thinking about 11 points per $1,000. So another player I'm looking at is accuracy. 6.2K means he needs about 68 points to make value for a cash lineup, and he's done that in 6 out of his last 10 games, despite the fact that Seattle's been struggling. So I think accuracy is a pretty strong play in cash. I don't see a lot of upside in that play, so maybe not a big tournament play, but I think accuracy still has some pretty good value, even in a pretty bad matchup. I think in either cash or GPPs, Snoopy is pretty enticing. Minimum priced on the slate. We don't know what to expect from Snoopy. Obviously, a tough matchup against Texas. If you listen to the podcast, we sort of talked about the position that he's in, but I think that he's a pretty interesting play at minimum price. Very hard for him to not make value at minimum price on DraftKings when we don't know what he's going to do. And finally, for the team slot, what I'm looking at, the first thing that sticks out, Toronto's cheaper than 100T, even though they're favored in that game. I think Toronto's strong at control, gets you a couple extra round win points as well if they win. So I think Toronto here is probably just a misprice on DraftKings' part, and so I think that's pretty hard not to want to take there just because you know you're getting a pretty good price. I think the other team that sticks out is probably New York. I think another team that has a potential to win 3-0 in the control or do really well in the search, which is where you get most of your points from your team slot. So I think that there, New York makes a lot of sense. New York's a little bit cheaper than Atlanta, who's obviously, I think, going to be everyone's favorite play and would be my favorite play here. New York's 3.4K, where Atlanta's 3.8. So I think there, that's like the other option that I would play in New York if you're not interested in the cheaper Toronto, or if you just want to ball out and take Atlanta at the full price. So I think that's what I'm looking at. I think some GPP stacks. I think that New York is strong here. I think people are maybe undervaluing New York a little bit. So Hydra Captain mixed in with some Kismet could be really strong and like very unique compared to the field. Being able to stack that with the New York team slot. And then I think just leaning into phase in general is still going to be strong. I don't think they're priced high enough to make them prohibitively expensive on the slate. And I think Atlanta has probably the best matchup in the first round. So that's one other thing I would keep in mind if you're thinking about stacks. That's all for me. It's very early here in the morning in Sweden, so I hope that when people wake up and can listen to this before the games, this gives you a little insight. All right, I will see you tomorrow for day 2 DraftKings slate.